Welcome back to ChronoVerse, the show where we dig past the legends and find out how history actually happened. Last time, we told the story of how Rome began, not with a wolf and two abandoned twins, but with mud huts, a drained swamp, and a monarchy that ended in revolution. We left off with a brand new Roman Republic, barely surviving its first war, with no idea it would ever amount to much of anything. Today, we fast forward 500 years to the moment that same fragile republic became the most powerful state on Earth. A soldier stationed on Hadrian's wall in northern Britain could carry a letter to a merchant in Palmyra, deep in the Syrian desert, and it would arrive without ever crossing a border. Same empire, same law, same coin. That's roughly 2,800 miles, one government, the whole way. By 117 AD, under the Emperor Trajan, Rome reached its largest size ever. The empire touched 3 continents and governed somewhere between 50 and 90 million people. Historians still debate the exact figure, since no ancient census gives us a clean total. What's not disputed is the scale of the achievement. This was, by land area, one of the largest states the world had yet seen. But bigger wasn't automatically better, and the man who came after Trajan understood that better than almost anyone. Hadrian inherited an empire stretched to its limit. Trajan had pushed deep into Mesopotamia, further east than any Roman army before him. Hadrian looked at that overextension and made a decision that shocked plenty of Romans at the time. He gave some of it back. He pulled troops from indefensible territory. He built walls, like the ones still standing in northern England today, not to expand the empire, but to define where it stopped. That's the real turning point of Rome's prime, not another conquest, a decision about restraint. Because holding an empire this size wasn't going to be won with a sword. It was going to be won with roads, grain shipments, and a legal system flexible enough to make a Syrian merchant and a British farmer both feel, more or less, Roman.
Holding an empire this size meant solving a problem no state before Rome had really faced. How do you feed a capital city of roughly 1 million people when the nearest reliable farmland is hundreds of miles away by sea? The answer was Egypt. Every year, a fleet of grain ships crossed the Mediterranean from Alexandria to Rome, carrying enough wheat to feed the capital for months. Some of these ships were massive for their time. One description from the era puts a single Alexandrian grain vessel at over 180 feet long, roughly the length of a modern city block. Lose that fleet for a season, and Rome didn't face inconvenience, it faced riots. The emperor's popularity, in a very literal sense, floated on the Mediterranean. This is the part of Rome's prime that doesn't make it into the legends, not the legions, the logistics. Along with grain came law. As the empire grew, Rome had a choice every conquering power eventually faces: rule by the sword forever, or find a way to make conquered peoples want to stay conquered. Rome leaned hard into the second option. Provincial elites could gain Roman citizenship. Local customs were often left alone as long as taxes were paid and peace was kept. By 212 AD, the Emperor Caracalla would extend citizenship to nearly every free person in the empire, a policy so sweeping that some historians still argue over whether it was principled reform or a practical move to widen the tax base. Probably it was some of both. Underneath all of it ran the roads, over 250,000 miles of them by the empire's height, engineered so well that some are still walkable today, nearly 2,000 years later. A message from the emperor in Rome could reach a governor in Syria in weeks, not months. For the ancient world, that wasn't just fast, it was almost unimaginable. But an empire that runs on grain ships, shared law, and long roads has a hidden vulnerability. Every one of those systems depends on peace holding at the center. And peace, however carefully engineered, has never once in human history lasted forever. Something was already stirring at the edges of the map. Pressures Hadrian's walls and Trajan's conquests hadn't fully accounted for. Rome didn't know it yet, standing at the height of its power, but the very success that built the Pax Romana was quietly setting up the conditions for what would eventually strain it to breaking.
The moment that best captures Rome at its absolute peak didn't happen on a battlefield. It happened in a courtroom, in a will. In 138 AD, the Emperor Hadrian was dying, and he had no biological son. So he did something Rome had quietly been doing for decades, and it may be the single smartest habit the empire ever developed. He adopted his successor. Not a relative, not a favorite, a capable, experienced senator named Antoninus Pius, chosen specifically for the job. This wasn't sentimental, it was systemic. From Nerva in 96 AD through Marcus Aurelius nearly a century later, 5 emperors in a row came to power not through blood, but through adoption of the most qualified man available. Historians later called them the 5 good emperors. And this run is often treated as the true engine of the Pax Romana. Succession, the single most dangerous moment for any monarchy, had essentially been solved. Not through law, but through a workaround. Pick your best possible heir and make him family on paper. It worked spectacularly for 4 transitions in a row. And that's exactly what makes the 5th one the turning point of this entire story. Marcus Aurelius, the last of the 5, had what none of his predecessors did, a biological son who survived to adulthood. His name was Commodus. And when Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, he broke a century-long pattern that had quietly kept the empire stable. He didn't adopt the best man for the job. He handed power to his own blood. Commodus was 18. He had no interest in the grinding administrative work of running an empire. Roman sources, admittedly written by senators who despised him, describe a ruler more invested in performing as a gladiator in the arena than governing from it. Whatever the exact truth behind the hostile accounts, the practical result is not in dispute. The adoptive system that had produced 5 capable rulers in a row ended, and Rome's stability ended with it not long after. Here's how the how did it actually work mechanism underneath all of this. The adoptive emperors succeeded not because they were uniquely brilliant men, but because the system removed the worst risk any monarchy faces, an incompetent heir chosen by accident of birth rather than by merit. The moment that safeguard vanished, Rome's fate was back in the hands of chance, and chance does not favor stability forever. Commodus was assassinated in 192 AD. Strangled in his bath by a wrestler hired by his own inner circle. The year that followed is remembered as the Year of the 5 Emperors, a brutal scramble for the throne that historians still point to as the moment the Pax Romana's spell finally broke. The empire didn't collapse overnight, but the machine that had run so smoothly for nearly 2 centuries had shown everyone watching that it could be broken, and it never fully recovered that sense of inevitability again. Still, look at what that machine had actually built. At its height, Rome connected Hadrian's wall to the Euphrates, Alexandria's grain fleets to Roman bakeries, and a legal identity that let a merchant in Syria and a farmer in Gaul call themselves the same thing, Roman. Roads, law, and grain had done what conquest alone never could. They made an empire this size feel, for a while, almost ordinary to live in. That's the real story underneath the wolf and the mud huts from where this all began. Rome's prime wasn't a single golden afternoon. It was the payoff of 5 centuries of the exact same instinct that got it started in the 7 Hills. Absorb what works, adapt when it doesn't, and keep the system running even when the man at the top changes. So the next time you hear about an empire, a company, or an institution that seems to run itself, maybe ask what quiet, unglamorous system is actually holding it together, and what happens the day someone stops maintaining it. If you like this one, hit like, drop a comment with what era you want covered next, and subscribe. We're doing this again next week.